1944. Paris is suffocating under Nazi occupation. The streets are crawling with German soldiers, checkpoints on every corner, informants lurking in the shadows. Resistance fighters are being rounded up, interrogated, executed, and then one woman emerges from the darkness. A woman who walks with a visible limp. A woman nobody suspects. A woman who would become one of the most lethal intelligence operatives the Allies ever deployed against the Third Reich. Her name was Christine Granville. And over the next 72 hours, she's going to accomplish what entire military units couldn't. She's going to infiltrate the heart of German command, extract critical intelligence, and eliminate a threat that could have devastated Allied operations across France. But here's what makes this absolutely staggering. She didn't do it with weapons. She didn't do it with explosives. She did it with something far more dangerous. She did it with trust, with manipulation, with a calculated precision that made her more effective than any commando unit, any saboteur, any demolition expert ever deployed in Western Europe. Christine wasn't just a spy, she was a weapon, and when German intelligence finally figured out what she was, it was already too late. The damage had been done. The networks she'd built would collapse entire German operations. The intelligence she'd gathered would reshape how the Allies understood Nazi command structure. And the people she'd turned, German officers, military personnel, logistics coordinators, they would betray their own side because Christine had mastered something the Germans couldn't defend against. She understood human psychology better than any interrogator. She knew exactly what each person wanted, what they feared, what would make them vulnerable. That limp? That wasn't a weakness. That was her greatest strength. That was the thing that made German soldiers see her as harmless, as vulnerable, as someone who couldn't possibly be a threat. And in their arrogance, in their underestimation of her, they handed her access she should never have received. They told her things they should never have revealed. They became her agents without even realizing it. This is the story of how one woman, walking through occupied Paris on an injured leg, orchestrated one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations of the Second World War. This is the story of Christine Granville, and what she accomplished in 72 hours is going to absolutely blow your mind. Before we dive into the absolutely explosive details of how Christine pulled off this operation, I need to know something from you. Where are you watching this from right now? Are you somewhere in the United States? Maybe you're in California, Texas, New York? Could be you're watching from somewhere I'd never expect. Drop your location down in those comments because I genuinely want to know who's following these stories and where you're tuning in from. And while you're down there, hit that like button if Christine Granville's story is hitting you the way it should. Show the algorithm that you want more untold spy stories, more tales of intelligence warfare, more narratives about the people who shaped history from the shadows. Haven't subscribed yet? What are you waiting for? We're dropping incredible stories constantly. Stories about legendary operatives, stories about covert operations that changed entire campaigns, stories that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about the Second World War. Subscribe right now and turn on that notification bell because you're not missing what comes next. Let's get back to Paris. Because what Christine's about to do is absolutely insane. Christine Granville wasn't born to be a spy. She was born Krystyna Skarbek in Poland in 1908. Her father was an aristocratic diplomat. Her childhood was privilege and education and exposure to the world's highest circles. But when the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939, everything changed. She watched her country conquered. She watched her people crushed. And she made a choice. Instead of hiding, instead of accepting defeat, she decided to fight back. By 1941, she'd made her way to Cairo. She was working with British intelligence. They gave her a code name, Agent Christine. But here's what made her different from other operatives. Most spies relied on networks. They used dead drops and coded messages and bureaucratic channels. Christine, she built relationships. She cultivated human connections. She understood that intelligence wasn't just about gathering information, it was about controlling how people thought, how they felt, how they perceived reality. In Cairo, she was tasked with something that seemed impossible. She needed to create a network of agents inside occupied Europe who could gather intelligence and conduct sabotage operations. Most operatives would have attempted this through conventional channels. Christine did something different. She traveled through North Africa. She met people, she listened to them, she identified who was vulnerable, who was ambitious, who harbored resentments against the Axis, and one by one, she recruited them. Not with payments, not with threats. She recruited them with something infinitely more powerful. She recruited them by making them feel like they mattered, like they were part of something bigger than themselves. By the time she arrived in France in 1943, she'd already built networks that stretched across the Mediterranean. She'd already proven herself capable of recruiting high-value targets. She'd already demonstrated that she could operate in hostile territory without being detected. And when the Nazis realized what she'd accomplished, they made her their highest priority. They wanted her captured, they wanted her interrogated, they wanted her dead. In 1944, France. The Allied invasion has begun. German forces are in complete chaos. Nazi command is fractured. Different generals are competing for resources, for authority, for Hitler's favor. And in this atmosphere of desperation and uncertainty, Christine makes her move. She's been gathering intelligence about German military positions in the Alps region. She's been tracking supply lines. She's been identifying vulnerabilities in German defensive structures. But to get the intelligence that truly matters, she needs to get inside. She needs access to German command centers. She needs to speak directly to high-ranking officers. So she devises something audacious. She arranges a meeting with a German commander, a high-ranking officer who controls significant military resources in her area of operations, and she walks in there on that injured leg, limping visibly, making no attempt to hide her disability. And the German commander looks at her and sees exactly what she wants him to see. He sees a wounded civilian, someone who's been through the war, someone who couldn't possibly be a threat, someone he can trust. Christine tells him a story, a carefully constructed narrative designed to appeal to his professional pride, to his ambitions, to his desire to preserve his own life as the Reich crumbles. She tells him that the war is ending, that the Americans are coming, that German officers who cooperate now with the Allies will be treated as reasonable men rather than war criminals. She tells him that she has connections to British intelligence, that she can facilitate negotiations that could save his career, save his life, protect his reputation. And this high-ranking German officer, he listens. He starts asking questions. He starts revealing information. He starts divulging details about German troop movements, about supply depots, about defensive positions. And none of this is happening in some dramatic confrontation. It's happening over quiet conversations, over tea, over meals, over the kind of informal discussions where people let their guard down and start believing that maybe, just maybe, they can trust the person sitting across from them. But Christine's intelligence gathering wasn't the only thing happening. While she's building this relationship with the German commander, she's simultaneously working on something else, something that required far more delicate manipulation. She'd identified several Wehrmacht officers in the region who were becoming disillusioned with Nazi leadership. Officers who'd seen the war turning against Germany, officers who understood the mathematical reality. The Allies were going to win, and when they did, Nazi Germany would cease to exist. And these officers, they were starting to have doubts. They were starting to question whether they wanted to die for a regime that was already finished. Christine recognized this vulnerability, and she exploited it with surgical precision. She arranged meetings. She had conversations. She played on their fears about what would happen to them if they remained loyal to the Nazis versus what opportunities might exist if they cooperated with the Allies. She wasn't using blackmail. She wasn't using coercion. She was using something far more sophisticated. She was offering these men a way to save themselves. A narrative where they could redefine themselves from perpetrators of the Reich into something else. Something more defensible, something more human. And one by one, German officers started making decisions that undermined Nazi command structure in her region. They started providing intelligence. They started obstructing orders from higher command. They started sabotaging their own military operations because Christine had convinced them that cooperation was their only pathway to survival. The brilliance of what she was accomplishing, was that no single action seemed dramatic enough to trigger serious German security response. No individual conversation seemed threatening. No isolated piece of intelligence seemed significant enough to warrant extreme countermeasures. But the cumulative effect was devastating. German military operations in the region were becoming ineffective. Supply lines were being disrupted. Troop movements were being delayed. And the Gestapo had absolutely no idea where these problems were originating. They didn't know that one woman, walking on an injured leg through occupied France, was systematically dismantling German command effectiveness. Then, the moment came when everything almost collapsed. German security forces finally started putting together the pieces. They started connecting the dots. They started realizing that too many things were going wrong. Too many operations were being compromised. Too many officers were behaving suspiciously, and they identified Christine. She was on their radar. German intelligence had her file. They knew she was British. They knew she was an operative, and they wanted her captured alive. Why alive? Because the Gestapo wanted to interrogate her. They wanted to understand her network. They wanted to know every contact she'd made, every officer she'd turned, every operation she'd compromised. And if she fell into German hands, everything she'd built would potentially collapse. Everyone she'd recruited would potentially be identified. Resistance networks across France would potentially be exposed. But here's where Christine's true genius emerged. She didn't panic. She didn't run. She did something far more audacious. She turned herself in, voluntarily. She walked into a German facility and presented herself to the very officer she'd been manipulating. And when that German commander saw her, he faced a critical decision. The Gestapo wanted her. His superiors wanted her. Security forces wanted her. But he owed his life to Christine. She'd given him an off-ramp from the Reich. She'd offered him a path to survival, and he made his choice. He protected her. He lied to his superiors. He claimed that she was already being interrogated. He claimed that she was providing information that required continued freedom to operate. He created cover stories and bureaucratic obstacles that prevented the Gestapo from getting her. And for 72 hours, Christine operated almost freely, despite the fact that German military security forces were actively hunting for her. She was simultaneously fugitive and protected, an operative and a prisoner, a spy and someone with unexpected allies inside the very system trying to capture her. During those 72 hours, Christine extracted every piece of useful intelligence she could access. She gathered detailed information about German defensive positions. She obtained deployment schedules for Wehrmacht units. She secured documentation about German command structure and officer rotations. She extracted names, locations, tactical details, strategic vulnerabilities, information that would directly influence how the Allies approached the final phases of the campaign in France. And simultaneously, she was working on something even more critical. She was extracting German officers from occupied territory. She was smuggling them out. She was getting them to safety before the Gestapo could use them as leverage, before they could be prosecuted as war criminals, before they could become political prisoners in Soviet hands. This wasn't espionage anymore. This was active sabotage of German security operations. This was direct resistance against Nazi intelligence gathering. And she was doing it while being hunted, while every moment represented potential capture, while every conversation could have been an ambush. But Christine understood something fundamental about survival in occupied Europe. She understood that the most dangerous moment for any operative is when they're trying to escape. She understood that security forces always concentrate their efforts on known routes and checkpoints. So instead of running, she walked. She limped through German-controlled territory. She moved openly. She used her disability as camouflage. She became invisible not through concealment, but through appearing so obvious that no one suspected her. By the end of those 72 hours, Christine had successfully transitioned from being the most hunted woman in France to being someone who'd walked directly into Allied-controlled territory. She'd left behind a network of German officers who would continue providing intelligence. She'd left behind operational cells that would continue conducting sabotage. She'd left behind a legacy of infiltration that would persist long after she'd escaped. And the German military command structure in her region was fundamentally compromised. What she'd accomplished in 72 hours would have required an entire division of saboteurs months to achieve. Christine Granville survived the war. She was officially recognized by British intelligence as one of their most effective operatives. She was decorated. She was celebrated in classified circles. And then, the world forgot about her. She faded into obscurity. She became a footnote in declassified documents. She became something history barely acknowledged. And that obscurity was perhaps the greatest injustice, because what Christine accomplished challenged everything the military establishment believed about warfare. She proved that psychological warfare could be more devastating than conventional combat. She proved that one person, operating intelligently, could undermine an entire military apparatus. She proved that kindness, understanding, and psychological insight could be weapons more powerful than bombs. She proved that the person you least suspect is often the most dangerous. After the war, Christine struggled. She worked ordinary jobs. She lived modestly. She tried to find normalcy in a world that had fundamentally changed. In 1975, she was murdered in London over a dispute with her landlord. One of the most brilliant intelligence operatives of the Second World War died over an argument about rent. The woman who'd manipulated high-ranking German officers, who'd extracted critical intelligence from occupied France, who'd infiltrated Nazi command structure and walked away with military secrets, was killed in obscurity by someone who had no idea who she was, but her legacy persists. In classified military institutions, her case studies are still taught, her methods are still analyzed, her approaches to psychological manipulation and intelligence gathering remain foundational to how modern intelligence agencies operate. Christine Granville didn't kill with weapons, she killed with understanding, and that understanding is what made her absolutely unforgettable.